Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The attitudes expressed are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised, there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
Welcome back, Recovery Sort Of. Jason, a guy trying his best to do some recovery type stuff with.
I'm Billy. I am a person in long-term recovery.
And today, to talk about grief in recovery, we have Caroline.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So I just want to mention again, thank you to Sarah for making a donation to Recovery Sort Of. There's a PayPal donation button, hiding tinily on the bottom of our website, recoverysortof.com. And Sarah and Julie have both made donations, and we just appreciated this. So this episode is brought to you by them in part. And again, to reiterate, we are never going to buy ourselves a private plane with your donations. We do want to fund the podcast so that it pays for itself, which is always a good idea. But then from there, the rest of any money we would ever make
goes to your guest speakers.
Yeah, to the guest speakers, so we can have good guest speakers. We're going to donate it back to the community in some way, shape, or form. We're setting up a fund actually to provide groceries, clothes for job interviews, diapers, whatever the immediate needs are of somebody that's just fine in recovery who, maybe they've gotten the spot at the recovery house, but they just need some items to get by because that's what we need as humans. So that's our goal. We're in the process of getting that set up. So if you donate, you don't have to worry about us, getting strippers and cocaine with it because we won't be doing that. At least not the cocaine.
Darn, I didn't know that part.
So anyway, to get back to the topic today, grief, right? It's something that we don't really talk about a lot in recovery, I don't think. I don't think I've ever been at an NA meeting and the topic's been grief or anything. It's usually like a spiritual principle or, I don't know, something else that doesn't seem all that useful sometimes.
Usually the most you hear about tragedy is people talking about, it's not all roses and butterflies or, stuff like that. But they don't get into, let's hear it.
Yeah, and that's exactly something that came to my mind, too, in this process that I was going to explore with us today. I'll wait till a little later to bring it up. But yeah, that idea that, we're very quick to move past it, right? And I've heard some horrific things in meetings, right? The way people were treated as children traumatically, going through losing their own children to the disease of addiction, all kinds of awful stuff. And there is not much conversation about grief processing. So it seems like a relevant topic. I'm already talking too much, so I will let Caroline tell her version of why she's here to join us in this particular topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So first I'll say, I think my experience has been a little different than you guys. I would say that I've not been in any meetings where grief was the topic, but I definitely feel like I've been in a ton of meetings where people have shared about recent losses, whether that's dogs, honestly, I think is the one I've heard the most. People in meetings crying that they just had to put their dog down. But certainly there was my home group. We had some parents pass. In other home group members had parents pass, 3 of them in the last 2 years, and they definitely would share, about that struggle. And maybe that's contributed to my openness with it a little bit, or maybe that's just me. I don't know. But
I'm surprised there was no old timer yelling you lost your fucking dog, who cares? Shut down and shut up.
Well, and of course I thought about what you had mentioned something a few weeks ago about men don't openly share about emotions as readily as females do, and definitely not in groups. Guys will get together one-on-one and share some intimate, vulnerable stuff, but in a big group it's kind of you're only sharing it to tell how tough you are and how you got through it and you're so much stronger and better now.
The one allowable male emotion, anger.
Yeah,
That's
right.
it. Oh, you're sad?
So I wonder if
you're
that's
angry.
a male-female
You're depressed? No, you're angry. You're going through grief? Nope, you're angry.
Right.
Happy? Nope, that's anger. That's definitely anger.
I think it's definitely a male-female thing, but I also think that that is something that recovery works towards resolving
Is
for
it?
men. I think so.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I know men that are much more comfortable today sharing how they're feeling, what they're struggling with than they would have been when they first came into the rooms.
I think that 90% of the men I know, then, that if that's true, then they're not recovering. Just saying.
Yeah, I don't know. I can think of a few. Honest, if I'm being honest, I can only actually specifically think of one, but I know I've heard other guys in meetings talk about how they're feeling. I've seen some men in meetings cry. That's not super common. And if you do it a lot, you will get a nickname.
Oh, Wesley?
No, but yes, that's another one. I hope he doesn't listen.
I love Wesley. He knows that people refer to him as Crying Wesley. That's not a big shock. I fucking love Wesley, though.
No, there was another one up in the Harford County area, too.
Okay. So I'm not saying that some people don't get in touch with their emotions and have a much better time with it, but I feel like as a whole, at least from the recovery community in the Baltimore and surrounding areas, it's definitely like you got to be a recovery warrior, right? You got to be a recovery soldier, a NA soldier, and you're still, now you're dying with your boots on trying to help addicts get clean or something, but it's still like this whole tough guy, I got to be a biker, macho.
But don't we have to drop the masks? You
Good luck
know,
with that.
I mean, that is a part of recovery, is getting in touch with who you really are. The lie is dead, right? Those gender.
I don't think everybody wants that.
Well, that's true. I mean, not everybody wants recovery, or not everybody wants all parts of recovery, right? A lot of people come in and they just want to stop using.
Well, and we've explored that idea that, like, if you go to a lower socioeconomic status region, right, where people don't have the resources and all that, they're going to have NA meetings. If you go to a place where they got money and like nice paved roads with no potholes and shit, they're going to have ACOA, Al-Anon, they're going to have sex addicts meetings. Like, they're going to be able to deal with these, I hate to say, higher level problems, right? But it's like, in some areas, it's enough just to fucking get clean.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm clean. I still cheat on my wife. I still do these other cruddy things.
Live in a recovery house with 7 years clean.
Right.
I'm the manager.
Right.
Right. I still ride around the motorcycle gang and we steal from Walmarts and beat people up and shit, whatever. Like, I'm clean.
Right.
It's better. And I feel like that might be a thing. Like, the higher you go, maybe more money, you want more from it. I don't know. It's weird.
Maslow's hierarchy of
Yes,
needs. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think we've done our first way off topic.
Oh, yeah. Where are we talking about today? Grief?
Grief, yes.
Good grief.
So I was supposed to be introducing myself,
Yes,
and I'm the one who
yes.
took us like sideways. But yeah, so I'm Caroline. I am also a person in long-term recovery. I did want to ask you, I'm going to take us off topic again.
That's fine.
Do you come up with your unique way of explaining your status in recovery prior to each podcast?
I did at one point when I was really trying to get creative with it, and then I just went back to saying long-term recovery for quite a while, and now I really personally don't like the long-term tag. It bothers me. It's like an elitist kind of thing to some extent. So now it's just kind of like, what's the
But
fucking...
do you wing it every time, or do you have
Now I
one...
wing it.
Okay.
Now it's what's
That's
the
what I wanna
goofiest
know.
fucking way I can say I'm in recovery. Like, I'm a guy who hasn't had a donut in 3 weeks. I don't know. Like, damn, now I want a donut.
So yeah, so I first I have to say I'm super excited to be here. I have been a listener for a while. Selena turned me on to the podcast, actually.
Aw, thank you, Selena.
But I used to get really excited when I would get mentioned on the podcast. I would interact with you guys' social platforms and comment something, and Jason would kind of repeat it back. And I would actually, at the time, I remember being in the car with my husband and being like, I'm podcast famous. So now I'm truly podcast famous.
Yeah, you're legit.
there you go.
Yeah. So, super excited about that. Thank you for having me on. But, I, up until a year ago, was very fortunately not very qualified to talk about grief at all. I had lost some older family members over the years. I had lost some good friends, but none that I was like, they were day to day in my life anymore. But then last summer, I lost my husband to this disease. And then in the fall, my dog was diagnosed with cancer. And I just put him down 2.5 weeks ago now. So, my family basically got cut in half over the last 12 months or so. I feel like I'm a little bit of a grief expert at this point in my life. So that is why I'm here.
And maybe this is the time to bring the thing that Billy set up and make it relevant. I feel like we always look at grief as losing a person, right? Or a loved animal or something along those lines. But to me, and my boss at work, like the way she operates with any of her clients is through the lens of grief. That's like her expertise. And like every fucking thing in life is grief. Everything is a loss of something, right? And that's how she sees it. And I believe that, like that's a lens. And I feel like we do this when we come into recovery. We actually, to some extent, grieve the life we used to live in addiction, right? The ways we used to act, all these different things. But I'm noticing that the 12-step program doesn't really give a lot of space for that, right? And so here's what I mean by that. There's stages of grief. They're pretty well established. They're not linear. You go in and out of them. You process them however you do, but they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance, right? And I feel like in the 12-step world, we kind of push everybody to bypass the first fucking 4 and go straight to acceptance. And like, if you're not there, you're doing it wrong. Like, oh,
right.
Yeah, Caroline, it's terribly sad that you lost your husband, but you just need to fucking accept it and move on because that's how we heal around here.
Right,
like,
you'll heal if you just push through.
Right, we missed part. And I was thinking about that from the lens of we don't let people grieve the addiction part of themselves, but I don't know that we really let people grieve, anything else either.
Thank God no one said that to me. I will say, I think that, so I think you're absolutely right that there is, losing a job is a process of grief, a friendship ending. There's a lot of different kind of grief scenarios that we experience day in and day out, but I would differentiate between those kind of everyday life changes that we do have to get used to. And even so, obviously, leaving active addiction is not an everyday life change, but that level of grief versus losing someone who is a massive part of someone or something who is a massive part of your life and you have like deep love for, I think that there's definitely a difference there. And then I would also say that I think our society as a whole puts that pressure to just get over it and move on. Way more than just the NA community, because grief is uncomfortable for people and they don't know what to say and they don't know how to treat you. And so it's easiest to just kind of act like nothing's wrong after a few weeks. And that was definitely my experience. NA showed up for me immensely. I got really lucky that my husband passed. That's a crazy thing to say. I was very fortunate that my husband passed and I found out on a Friday because then I had a lot of people available to me over those first couple of days, at least being the weekend and people not having to work. But yeah, NA really definitely showed up for me in those first days. And I definitely got kind of a lot of check-ins and sympathy in the first week or two. But I definitely remember showing up to my home group, which we were meeting kind of in the park because of COVID at that point. week 3, week 4, week 5, and sometime around that point is when like the "how are you doing" stopped. And I was still reeling, but to interact with people that I knew quite well and would see on a regular basis, it kind of felt like they just assumed I was over it, which was hurtful and definitely made me question the validity of my grief, or other people's interpretation of the validity of my grief, I would say would be probably the better phrase. But what I've learned since is, so one of the things, I think recovery's given me a lot of tools to enable me in the grief process, and I can talk about that more. But I was listening to an audiobook a few weeks ago, and a woman was kind of talking about that similar experience, right? So she's not in recovery at all, but her husband died, and people just acting like, seeing her and being like, "Oh, we have great weather," like not bringing it up, not addressing it. And what she found out through talking to some of her people that were closest to her were that they were worried that they were going to remind her and like make her upset. So I think, there is a little bit of just people don't know what to say or what to do, and so they ignore it. And I think that's kind of one of the big issues with our entire society today.
Yeah, and I learned that with my sister. So, we lost my nephew, her son, when he was 19 in a car accident. And very similar for a lot of years, because him and I share a birthday, and we were kind of close growing up. She had him when she was really young. She still lived at home with my parents, so he was born and lived at our house, almost like a sibling for several years of his life. And so anyway, similar after he was gone, like obviously there's still a loss for me, but it's way different for her losing a kid and not knowing how to address that, or feeling uncomfortable, or like you say, feeling like if you bring it up, it's going to bring back some pain. And talking to her about that, and her experience was like, no, I like to know that people think about them. Like,
Absolutely.
Yes, it's hard, and yes, it's painful to think about, but it's worth it. Like, it's worth it to talk about it. So, like, I try to do that, and it's so hard, like, to call her on his birthday or on his, I don't know what you call the anniversary of a death, but, call him on to call her on that day. And most days now she doesn't answer, but I still try to call and leave a message or send her a text. And it's, of course I'll say it's been like, I think 10 or 11 years now, but it's still painful.
Yeah.
It's definitely painful for her.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the other point is it's good to talk about those that we've lost. It's good to hear that other people are thinking of them too. But for people who have been through that kind of like intense loss, they're never not thinking about it.
Right.
It's not like I ever like forget my husband died and then someone bringing it up is going to like remind me.
And that's similar to what she had said.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, as a person in that situation, like, and I don't know if this is just addicts or maybe it's normal people too, but like I'm always self-centered, like, oh, this is awkward for me to have to do. And sometimes I have to remind myself, like, look, dummy, your awkwardness is minimal in comparison to her feelings, and it's more important that I try to give her some sort of, I don't know and I know it's not, peace isn't the right word, but some sort of love, to show her that love and respect than it is for me to feel a little uncomfortable bringing up, a painful situation.
Right. Yeah. I would say a reach out means a lot. It for me anyway, when people have reached out to check on me or see how I'm doing or anything. It's always meant a lot. So
we are asking a large thing of people who can't sit with themselves and their own feelings to make space for ours. Really, I'm not saying it's not the healthy or better or right. I hate to use the word right, but I use it all the time. Thing to do for people when we can. But I mean, most of the people I interact with in my world really struggle to be still with their own feelings, much less try to create a space and container for someone else to, like, they're not going to purposefully go in and even if they understand the concept of, hey, it's not about my baby feelings and my uncomfortability, like it's about helping this person, they're still not going to be able. They're just not going to be able to do that.
Right. With 3, 6, 9 months clean. But don't we have an expectation that after a certain period of time and a certain length of time in recovery and some work that they should be?
I'm talking about people outside the program as well.
Okay.
Yeah, he's talking
Okay,
about anybody.
okay.
I'm just talking about people in general.
Yeah, but
Like,
that's an issue.
that's what our
Right.
society is. Well, and that goes back to what you said about our society. Like, not only do we have this fear of, you know, these awkward and uncomfortable conversations and places, but then we also have our societal ideal on what's the accepted amount of time people can grieve. And there's like no fucking timetable on that.
No.
But all right, well, you know, if you've been with somebody for 3 years, you get half of that time to grieve, or, you know, 6 to 9 months is your window. Like, no, you get as long as you fucking need. And who knows how complicated this grief is from past griefs that weren't dealt with, or from other factors that are involved in it. Not seeing the person, not seeing the passing or the transitioning, not being able to visit the area, maybe you weren't able to attend a funeral because you were incarcerated. Like, there's all these other factors that make it even more difficult because, believe it or not, the societal pieces of processing a transitioning or a death of a loved one all help in the grief process. That's kind of why people go to the scene of an accident and put the bears and shit up at that physical location, because that location is like a marker and an important piece of their processing it. And so when we lose somebody in this kind of fashion, we don't really get that. Like, that's missing.
Yeah, that's interesting because so my husband, for whatever reason, you know, he had moved into a recovery house, seemed to be doing good, tested dirty, got kicked out of the recovery house. I would not let him come back home. He was supposed to be moving into another recovery house, but what he chose to do instead was go and rent a room in the town that I live in like a boarding house, and died there that night. And it was, you know, in interacting with the cops and, you know, working to get his stuff back from that place, it was critical to me to not know where that house is. Because I don't live, so the town of Rising Sun, I don't need to be vague, I don't live in town. This place I believe was in town, but I go into town multiple times a week to run to the Martins or whatever. I did not want to, for the rest of my life, have to drive past the place that I knew he had passed. And maybe that's because of the gruesomeness of an overdose. Or, I mean, I guess a car wreck can be gruesome too, but to know that he was found there already deceased, like, to just envision that in my mind, I just didn't want to have to think of that every time I drove by wherever that location was.
And see, I feel like without knowing, you're just going to do the same thing anyway and think about it when you drive by anywhere in town.
I don't.
No?
No.
Because I would be like, I wonder if it was that house.
No, because I
Or
don't
maybe
want to
that
know.
one.
I don't want to know. I know there is a house in town that has a sign out that says rooms for rent. But my guess is it might be that place, but I don't want to know. I don't want to know for sure. It feels like knowing would forever tie his death to that spot, and I would forever think about the way he died.
And I think the way people pass is different. You know, it affects the grief process
absolutely.
too, because like my mom passed, and she had been ill for a long time, and I ride past the house. You know, she died at home in her house. We were all there. I mean, it was, as far as people passing, it was a pretty peaceful, and,
Right.
and she was surrounded by family and loved ones, and it was still hard, and there's still grief around that, but I can ride by that place and I don't have a lot of negatives tied to it. You know what I mean? Like, there's positive tied to that, so it's different. So I think the way people pass affects that too.
I would
and
agree
my
with
sister
that.
had said similar. So the accident her son was in was right on Route 40 in Red Toad Road. I mean, she drives that road all the time, and she used to mention similarly that she didn't like that people put markers and stuff up there, you know, a big cross, and because there's 2 other kids that died in the car with him. Someone had ran a red light and hit them, killed 3 teenage kids.
Wow.
So friends would put stuff up and there was stuff out there. And she had said at one point, like, she didn't want anyone to do that. For, I guess, we never got into it, but probably a similar reason. Like, she's got to drive that road all the time. She doesn't need a reminder there all the time.
And I don't want to be insensitive with this statement, or
Jason already told me he'd be intentionally trying to make me cry.
I did not.
For the viewers.
So look, we all do things in a different way, right? There is no right or wrong way to do grief. The things we generalize about grief, about people who do better, that see the physical location of where it happened and are familiar with that. Like, that's a generalization that might work for 80%, 90%, some percent, more than half. Does not mean it's right for everybody. So I'm not trying to say that whatsoever. I do want to ask, though, to me, it comes across like if that's a piece of it that will bother me for an extended period of time, or that I'm still not at peace with, that almost sounds like a part of grief that I'm just not willing to go through. Like, it seems like there would be a grief process that where I could come to peace with the entirety of that too. And I'm not trying to belittle anybody's grief process, your sister's or yours, Caroline. I don't know. That's kind of how that sits with me.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting point. I think that's really valid. And I think my response to that is that I feel like with time, some of those potential triggers will become less triggering. I still don't know that I ever want to know where it happened, and I don't think that it's necessary for me to know that. But one of the things that I have done, I don't believe that I've avoided grief. I don't believe it's really possible to, I guess maybe it is. For some people, I think it depends more on your personality. I think it is maybe possible for some people to kind of stick their head in the sand and ignore it. For me, that's not a possibility. But I have kind of made sure to not stick my hand on the stove, so to speak, right? If something I know is going to be painful for me, some occurrence or activity or music is a really good example. There's just certain stuff that even today, 10 months later, I don't want to listen to. There's a lot of stuff I don't want to listen to. And I have my moments of grief where things will come up and I'll cry and I'll move on from it. But I also feel like, and when that happens, I don't push that away. But I also feel like I don't need to actively seek that kind of stuff out either. I get enough of that in normal day-to-day life without doing things that I know are going to upset me. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, there's surely, again, no right way. And I don't even know that jumping into grief work head first makes it happen any faster, right? There's definitely timetables. We talk about the stages aren't in order and you hop in and out. And that's also you might run through all the stages with one piece of the grief, but then maybe there's another piece that you haven't got to yet and you have to do it all over again, right?
I don't know, but personally I feel like the stages of grief are nonsense.
Well,
I do.
I mean, there are things that people go through. So I think of probably my biggest grief experience since I've been clean actually wasn't around death. It was finding out our kids have been molested by their grandfather. I was angry for years of time, and maybe wasn't that the first stage, anger? I don't know what the stage is.
No, denial's the first stage.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know that I went through that one. There was no denial, but there was a lot of anger for years, and
you're a man. Denial comes out as anger.
Yeah. Right. So, and then I feel like I've worked on it and processed it. We did a lot of things, to try to help with the grief. We did the press charges and did everything, got my daughter counseling and, did all the good, healthy things. And now, for the most part, I'm okay with it. But occasionally I can get either really, really hurt, for my daughter or really angry, even now, now I'm getting upset talking about it. But it's I don't feel like I haven't worked on it. You know what I mean? I don't feel like I haven't healed from it, but it can still come back at times. Sometimes, like you say, when you're not even ready, you know, or sometimes when you're not even thinking about it, it's like a punch in the gut, you know, like a slap in the face, you know. And I wouldn't say like, oh, that means I haven't healed from it. Like, no, I'm pretty good with it, you know, 90% of the time.
Is that the 90% of the time you're just not focused on it, though? And when I say that, I'm not arguing that you're not healed from it either. I think just being healed from grief, I don't think that means you don't feel the emotions of it anymore. Like, I don't believe that at all.
Yeah, things still hurt.
But I'm just curious if the 95% of the time it's not bothering you is because you're not looking at it. Like,
well,
that
no,
would make a lot of
what
sense.
I mean by that is if like another recovering person wanted to sit down and talk about that experience, you know, I'd be completely okay like sitting down and talking with them and sharing our experience with that with them. I've shared about it in meetings as part of my story of going through struggles and things that I've been through in recovery. I don't feel like it's a thing, like if it comes up, it's not something that I typically feel like I shy away from or diminish or ignore. But sometimes it just fucking hurts. You know, sometimes it's just painful. This episode has been brought to you in part by Voices of Hope, Inc., a nonprofit recovery organization made up of people in recovery, family members, and allies. Together, members strive to protect the dignity of those that use drugs and those in recovery by advocating for treatment, harm reduction and support resources, and mentoring. Please visit us at www.voicesofhopemaryland.org and consider donating to our cause.
I have a story or two that I tell, not even necessarily a bad story. They're kind of like positive emotions, but they really bring out emotional parts of me. And there's times I tell them and I don't have those emotions tied to them so much, and I call that dissociation. I don't know that like the emotions aren't tied to them anymore. That's just a moment when I'm not going to feel that this time when I talk about it. I don't know.
As an active choice?
As a subconscious choice. I'm just in a place where I'm not interested in feeling that kind of stuff right now.
Well, I think for myself, like the sharing about it or bringing it up in like a group, so I feel like at least trying to draw something positive or something good out of that whole experience is probably the best it's going to get. You know what I mean? Like it's trying to share that experience to let people know, like, hey, you can get through this stuff and you can stay clean. And there's like a kind of a healthier way to deal with some of these tragedies. You know, like I feel like that's empowering to other people. And if anything good can come out of a just totally fucked up, shitty situation, you know, I don't know that it's ever going to be good for my kids. You know, like I don't ever think that that's going to be, you know, like a bright side to that shit for them. But if I can use any of that
this again,
to help other people.
You're going to make me sound this terrible sounding shit. You're going to make me say it again. I feel like Dave from the last episode where he didn't want to put down any meditation form because, you know, meditation is good and that's great. I don't want to fuck with anybody's feelings about their grieving process or if they've done it well enough. Like, it's not about that. I would personally think maybe not as a complete finality of grieving, but at some point after really healing through grieving, we would almost be thankful for whatever it was. If not truly just thankful for the event because of what it meant for our lives in some way, right? And if that's, I know, God, Caroline's giving me that fucking look. I know. If that's
I'm going with you, but it's a stretch.
If that's you, talking about your experiences of what happened to you as a child and coming to a place of not just accepting that it happened and being okay with the fact that it happened, but really saying, you know what? I have been able to help 100 fucking guys process this. Thank God that shit happened to me. That's where I think the real goal, healthiest place we could possibly get to. Like the letting go, the forgiveness of the event, the grieving, and the at some point way in the fucking future, because this is not like when it just happens, but the thank God for that event, because now that has molded me to be this other person.
I think that's much easier to do when it's something that impacts you personally, and much harder to do when there are other people who have been directly impacted by that event.
You mean like Billy's
or in
description of
my
his daughter?
case, yeah, for me to say I'm grateful that my husband passed. I mean, he's a person that died and no longer exists, and there's other people that,
Depending on your belief system.
yes, that's true, but no longer, at a minimum, no longer exists in this existence, in this plane.
Right. In this life right now.
Yeah, I mean, his life is ended, and I can't see ever being grateful for that. Now, I am very much of the opinion, I'm grateful for my using, because, it's brought me the life I have today. Of course, a life filled with grief at the moment. But generally speaking, I've always been one to say, I'm grateful for those experiences, as bad as many of them were. Because it's made me who I am today, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think when another person is pulled into the mix, it's a lot harder to have, for me anyway, have any gratitude around that.
My experience with that, with my kids, just wrecked my whole belief in God, or that any of this makes any sense, or that there's any purpose to any suffering or any of that.
You gotta listen to that goddamn book, Billy.
I am. It's terrible. I'm trying. I've been listening to it.
It's terrible?
Yes.
What book are we talking about?
Yeah, well, I'll keep listening, but
Conversations with God.
Conversations with God. But it's just a matter of now, like, and I hear that, and I'm just like, bad shit just happens. Like, can't bad shit just happen? Does it have to be for a reason? Does it have to be... No, just shitty stuff happens because life is organic and natural, and it just moves, uncontrolled, unfettered. And so bad shit happens just like good shit happens. And
the unpopular opinion in Conversations with God is that nothing happens to a soul without the soul requesting it to happen. We ask for everything that happens to us because it's an experience we need.
Yeah,
but that impact, like, if that were true, then that terminated some other person's life, in my case.
But nothing happens to a soul that it doesn't ask for. So
he wanted it, and I wanted it, and his mother, his sister.
That's the unpopular opinion in the book, yeah.
Yeah.
If you listen further, that we're all actually one soul.
I mean, there's no way to dispel that,
Yeah.
right? So that's an argument that you can't argue against it.
Not trying to argue it at all. It's it's an interesting
for
take.
me, in my grief or painful situations, and we've had some others, but I guess it's been more helpful to look at those situations as like, all right, so what can I do with this to help other people, or to make this useful in some sort of way, other than just be impacted by a bunch of fucking pain and hurt. Like the reasons, the whys don't matter as much. And for myself, when I first got into recovery, I remember being a person early on in my life was like, why do I have to be an addict? Why do I have to suffer all this blah, blah, blah? Why? And then when I got clean this last time, I'm like, it doesn't matter why. Why doesn't help you figure it out. Like, what matters is, what are you doing now? What are you doing today? And what can you do to make yourself get better? And for me in my grief situations, that's kind of been a similar approach. Like, the why doesn't really matter, I mean, you can pontificate on all kinds of whys, but what matters is, all right, so what am I doing with this? Am I sitting, with my feelings now, allowing myself to grieve, allowing myself to be in pain and hurt, and like with the loss of my mom, that was pretty devastating. That was one where I came to a realization that my biggest fan my entire life was no longer here. The person that had supported me through all the worst that I ever was, that no matter what horrible stuff I did, she always loved me and showed up for me and cared for me. And that person wasn't here anymore. And that was tough. You know, I was like, wow, I never thought of that in that way, you know, that's what she was. We lost a child, Jen and I. Well, I don't know. I feel weird saying I lost the child because I wasn't carrying the child, but it was mine. So she was pregnant. She was like 3 months pregnant, and we hadn't told anybody. We were like keeping it kind of a secret and all that. And then she had a miscarriage. And not only that, but it was like traumatic. The whole situation was like traumatic. We went to the hospital. They're like, oh, you've lost the baby. And then they sent her home to like pass the baby at home, basically in the toilet, without telling us any of this stuff was going to happen. It was fucking terrible. Union Hospital in Elkton, don't ever go there. But, you know, that whole thing, we're going through all of that, and no one knows. No one in our support group even knows that she's pregnant. And we go through all of that stuff, and that was pretty traumatic. In the loss of, like, say, the whys. You know, why is this happening? We're clean now. We're doing all the right things. None of this is supposed to be going on. And it just was like getting into the whys didn't help me a lot then either.
I'm going to move away from this topic because I'm the bad guy right now. So let's point the finger at somebody else.
I don't think it's bad. I mean, it's just perspectives and how we look at things. I don't think it's bad. I mean, I think what you're saying can be useful to some people. I mean, just for myself, and there are people that are going to need that why. There are people that are going to struggle with that question. And I don't think it's harmful to ask that question.
I think you need the why if you have the broader belief system that it doesn't fit into, right? So and I don't want to throw anyone under the bus here, but if I believe in this caring, loving being that always has my best interests at heart, and then there's a situation that occurs that really feels in contrast to that, I need to come up with the why to make my belief system whole again.
I don't, it's my job to help people make meaning of everything in their life. I just assume that that's how we come out healthier, because everybody I know that doesn't do that doesn't get that, I guess.
That's interesting. You don't work for a faith-based organization, do you?
No, not at all. And I don't actively include any of my spiritual beliefs into anything that people don't already believe.
I think there's a difference between finding meaning in everything that happens and finding a silver lining or some amount of value in everything that happens. Because I will say that I can find a silver lining in my husband's death. I can find a silver lining in the COVID mess. I don't have a silver lining for my dog yet, but I might be able to find one at some point. It's very new, but I would not say I can find a meaning.
And see, I think silver linings are based on the entire value judgment of anything being good or bad, which I don't believe in to begin with.
Yeah,
we
have
of that.
Very different belief systems.
There's no such thing as good or bad. Everything just is to me.
Yeah,
obviously, right? So I don't know. It's interesting, but I am going to move us in the direction of picking on somebody else besides me for a minute, because I feel a little like the bad guy, whether I am or not.
Must be. I must. Oh, man. I'll say this nicely. I must love you a lot, because I never take what you say as insulting or attacking. And I've heard other people say that. I'm like, no, I don't take you that way at all.
You have heard other people say that? Jesus, now it's real. Now I really got a complex. No, I am a challenging person. I know that. Like, I'll challenge beliefs or thoughts.
And I think I like that. I like that about
Well, and I try to do it lovingly and compassionately. In some forums. I do it like an asshole in other forums. Don't worry.
I think people with big egos feel like they need to be right all the time. And I definitely want to be right, but I recognize I have an ego that
I want to be right.
I'm fighting against. So I'm okay with challenging my own ideas and
now I want to know
thinking deeply
maybe
about
I don't
them.
want to know the people who said that. That's all right. So anyway, 5 stages of grief, right? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And just looking at this from a getting clean standpoint, right? I want to take it back to that. we come in, there is no space for most of these steps in the grieving process when you come into recovery. They don't say, I understand that you're in the stage of denial right now, right? Like, that's tough. It's okay. When you're ready to not be there, we'll move to the next piece, or we'll do something else. No,
and
let's
in fact,
get the fuck out of denial.
Yeah, in the work that I do in step 1, or the work that I've done, like, denial is actually a part of the disease of addiction.
Right.
Like, it's actually, it goes into the, like, that's your addiction, that denial thing.
And so then you look at anger. Anger, we kind of frame around the idea of resentment.
Yeah.
Right?
It's triangle
We don't want that
self-obsession.
either. Yeah, get the fuck out
anger,
of
fear.
resentment. Don't sit there. No, we're supposed to be allowed to sit here, right? Bargaining, I don't know that fits in a whole lot. People would probably just say, you're trying to bargain something that's impossible. You need to just get past that and accept the fact that it's not possible. Depression, I don't know what we would even say about that. I don't know. Stop being depressed, or go see mental health or something. But either way, my point being, we don't allow space for these in that arena. And I'm just wondering, when that's our first experience and our first teaching coming into recovery, do we carry that into how we deal with others who are going through other grief? Do we say there's no space for these other stages? Like, we don't do denial here. We don't do resentment. You need to fucking accept it.
Well, maybe it would be more helpful to think of it as those are areas that we really have to be very careful. You know what I mean? Like, I have to, as an addict, like, I have some responsibility for being an addict. I shouldn't go hang out in bars a lot because it's probably not a healthy place for me to be. Same with denial or anger. Like, yes, I'm going to feel them. Like, there might be times where I need to be around people that have alcohol or people that are using, but it's probably not a safe place to be, and I better really be on guard when I'm in those positions. There are some things we can do, as Caroline said. She had a support group that she was able to kind of rally behind when she was in that, early stages or in those stages of grief.
Are you mad at your husband?
I'm not, no.
Were you?
I was very mad at him during his relapsing, yeah. But not when he died. No, I haven't really gone through anger. That's why I said I think the stages are BS.
I hope
generalizations.
you're right.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about it, if they're not linear and you don't necessarily hit on any of them, what value do they add? These are normal, everyday emotions and reactions to a ton of different things. So what's the value of calling them out specific to grief if they don't outline a standard grief process and they don't even say you're definitely going to at some point go through all of these stages? Because that's not even the case.
It's like the side effects of COVID. It's like
right,
everything.
these are some things you may experience or may not at
Stages
some
of
point
grief,
in time.
You might lose taste.
Right.
I don't necessarily think that people who operate from a perspective of grief think you won't pretty assuredly have some place with each of these stages. I just think that they know that they're not just like steps, right? It's not like, oh, you feel this one, then you feel this one, then you keep moving forward. Like, there's back to this one, there's forward to that one. Like, we bounce around in them. But I would say that the grief expert's explanation for what you just said is that everything is grief. So yes, we do deal with these for most things that we end up dealing with. I don't know.
Yeah, that's
man.
how I always understood it too. You eventually go through all those stages.
Yeah,
right?
I think
at some
you do touch
I mean,
on
I don't
them.
know if that's true. That's my understanding is what you said, that
Well, and I
they
think
say
a lot
you
of
go
it,
through all of them.
a lot of the point of using them is to normalize it, right? Because a lot of people may experience anger in your situation at their husband for fucking not being here anymore, and then feel like it's wrong. I'm not allowed to be angry with him. He's not here anymore. How can I be mad at him? Oh, fuck that. You can. That's okay. I'm still probably mad at my dad for not being alive anymore, and it wasn't his choice to not be alive anymore.
Yeah. And I was pretty angry at my mom before she passed. I mean, I wasn't directly angry when she died, but so she had COPD and she smoked and just decided she was going to keep smoking. I mean, she was on oxygen, would wheel herself outside to smoke cigarettes. And I remember being pretty angry, that like it really felt like she was making a choice to choose to smoke and die rather than to try to fight against it and get better. And I was angry about that.
Well, and grief doesn't start the moment they
Right,
go.
yeah.
It
This
starts
was
early.
at a point where it was obvious she was going to die. It was just a matter of time at that point, months, which we all knew.
So I don't want to bring your social media into this, but I remember you saying, I always thought he would get clean and we would get back together, which could be either denial or bargaining, depending on how you look at it, I guess.
In my gut, I felt that he would get clean again.
Right.
Like just in the core of my being. Yeah, absolutely. It shocked me. And I did do a bit of grieving prior to his passing of the relationship,
Right.
of his presence. But yeah, no, I did not think this was going to kill him. He was definitely someone who managed to somehow escape consequences very, very regularly.
What kind of things were said to you that were completely fucking useless? Because generally we don't know what to say to people who are grieving. So what was said that was not helpful, and what was said that was actually maybe harmful?
I had someone should on me.
Ooh.
Someone told me probably around the 1 to 2 month point. I was talking to them about feeling like, I wasn't hearing from people anymore. Like people weren't checking on me. I was still really struggling at that point. And she said, well, at this point, you should really be the one reaching out.
Ooh.
That stands out in my mind as being hurtful.
Yeah.
If not, I don't know that it was harmful, but it was hurtful.
That's a shame-based statement.
Yeah.
I mean,
I didn't take
should
the shame
statements
on
are.
though.
Right.
I have a pretty good kind of sense of self, I think. So I didn't own that, but it was hurtful.
See, and I would say, I would possibly say something like that.
I could see you saying that.
And totally miss that it was like, only because like if I'm hurting in recovery, ultimately, like I've always felt like it's my responsibility to let people know. I don't know. But I'm like, oof, I gotta watch that. I could easily say that to someone.
I used to have a professor that would say, don't should on yourself. And I think that's probably true for other people as well.
Should is a shame-based statement.
Yeah.
Coming from other people, it's telling you what's expected of you, and if you're obviously not doing it, which is why they said it should to first place. So something's wrong with you that you're not doing it. Coming from yourself, you split yourself into two people: the one who's living how they're living, and the one who thinks that's wrong and they should be doing something else.
Would there have been a way to say it that was helpful, or was it just?
Yeah, I
It's
think
the wrong thing to say.
the thing that may have been helpful would have been to say, people are really busy. Maybe have you tried reaching out some? That's the helpful way to say it.
Which is still, to me, the wrong thing to say.
But not as bad. Not
Yeah.
nearly as
No,
bad.
and-
Because it contains no judgment.
Right. And
So tell me what you said to her.
Oh, I have no idea what my response was.
No, what'd you say to her first that made her say that?
Oh, I was complaining about, feeling like people
weren't reaching out.
that I wasn't hearing, that I never, my phone wasn't ringing. I wasn't getting text messages. I wasn't hearing from people.
Oh my God, Caroline, I'm so sorry to hear that. We should tell some more people, because we should definitely be calling you still if that's what you need. Thanks for letting us know.
That's lovely. That's lovely.
Right?
Yeah.
Like she's telling us what she needs. Why are we going to say you should be doing it yourself? She just can't. Obviously, or she would have just
Right.
fucking called people.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Like
was
if
definitely in a
she's
place
reaching out in
where-
that moment and saying, this is what I really needed.
Yeah, and see, that's where my lack of dependence on other people to meet my needs comes in. Like, everyone's going to let me down. No one's going to live up to my fucking expectations, so I got to do it myself.
I will say I have learned to be more like Billy since the experience with my
And
husband.
people would tell you that's not necessarily helpful.
And maybe
my
not.
wife would tell you
And
that.
maybe not, but based on the circumstances, I mean, between losing my husband and COVID, I've been alone a ton this last year. And so when I put my dog down, I didn't really expect to hear from people this time. And I did hear from a couple of people. And sure, plenty of people. Here's something I want to say. Saying I'm sorry on Facebook doesn't count. Like if I go through something traumatic or painful and you've reached out to me via a Facebook post, not direct messenger, but via a Facebook post, you commented, that is not the same as reaching out. I'm sorry. Doesn't count. But yeah, with my dog passing, I didn't expect the support. I mean, and again, I will say there were a couple of women that showed up for me in those first few days, fed me, drove me around, like we're there. And thank God for them. But
did you find it people you didn't expect?
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. I found that the one person I did really expect, not at all. And we're not friends anymore. Like the person who at that point in my life I would have called my best friend went totally MIA on me.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that's been my experience with grief. It's always amazing the people that show up or reach out and the people that don't. And I've never taken that overly personal. It's just allowed me to see the character of certain people a little better. And some people are definitely way better at recognizing pain or grief or that aspect of reaching out. And it's a really beautiful thing to see in people.
Are you angry at the person?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so you were some anger.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But I don't tie that to the grief process. I tie that to that's a separate issue.
Yeah, being angry at a shitty friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of tend to think that these elements
all intertwined.
Yeah, they might not come out towards a specific circumstance, but that anger has to come out somewhere.
I'd be angry at this person without grief being in the mix feeding anger.
I get that.
And again, that's why I think the grief stages are kind of BS, because you can find those 5 emotions in any area of your life at any given time. And if you want to correlate them to the grief you happen to be experiencing, then sure, but they're going to be there. I don't think that checks the box for...
Sound like a skeptic.
I am a skeptic. I am.
But I do think there's a beautiful part to being able to reach out to other people also, in that people will show up if they know there's a need. You know what I mean?
Not always.
Well, someone will usually. Yeah. Now, it may not be the people you think or the people you expect, but if you let people know,
yes,
people tend to show up.
Yes.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, you're talking about who's capable of showing up, right? And not
that's a whole nother
thing. In that moment, would I not also be pissed at people I thought needed to be there for me or were supposed to be there for me? Sure, I'd be pissed about it, and I'd take it personal. But in my grand scheme of how I look at life, it would be like, was somebody available?
Yes, and I'm grateful for that.
And I kind of think that's how the world works. And I would do my best not to, that person who I wanted there might have fucking sucked at being there, right? Like, they might have been the wrong person to have there, even though it's who I wanted. I don't know.
But it wasn't just, it was multiple events over the course of a few months, multiple opportunities to show up. So I think,
I'm not saying don't blame them. Yeah, fuck them if you don't like them. I'm not taking up for them. What did you hear? What was said to you? What was done for you that was helpful and useful in general?
The food was so helpful.
I hate to laugh, but I was just thinking, everyone always brings food. Is that? I mean, I was
it's
just thinking,
a real thing.
is that really helpful? And you're
so
helpful.
helpful. Yeah, because I was so hungry, but so incapable of figuring out
making food. Huh.
So I mean, so incapable of figuring it out. Yeah,
it is. It's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really helpful. Showing up, as soon as I the Cobbs actually came to my house. Beautiful Town of Rising Sun police came to my house. I was not where they were supposed to go, but I was the closest, so that's where they went.
Oh boy.
And as soon as they showed up, I knew, you know, my life is such that cops don't come to my house today.
Right.
So I knew. But as soon as they left, I called that best friend first. And then I called, the second person I called showed up. The second person I called was willing to drop everything and come to my house. And she ended up hanging out with me while we talked through some logistics stuff. She took me over my in-laws' house because we were having a hard time getting anyone to notify them, and didn't want to do it over the phone, and then took me to a meeting that night and took me home. So that was good, to not be alone, to have someone there. To have someone there that offered to come. I struggled to ask for help in a lot of scenarios. You know, if people are like, that's, I think, one thing that's not super helpful, and one of the audiobooks I was listening to would concur, is that, like, the let me know if you need anything. That still puts it back on me to have to ask you to do something, and for me to have to inconvenience you. And I don't like to inconvenience you. So, you know, her telling me she's coming, I'm not inconveniencing her. My girlfriend who brought me just like a plethora of ready to eat food, I guess the next day, I wouldn't have said, will you get me food? But she just brought it, you know?
Right.
So just like telling someone specific, this is what I'm going to do for you. And then you can ask any questions about, like, you know, do you like this? Do you need this? But, like, being the one to put that out there instead of putting the onus back on the person who's grieving to, like, figure out what they need or have to ask, I think that's really helpful too.
Yeah, that's tricky. Working from, like, what would be an ideal healthy standpoint for all the individuals involved, and, like, where are we really at? Like, that's probably much more useful for where we're really at as a society and as a people. Just fucking do it. I was thinking, like, I thought I knew all the right things to say for people in grief until I lost my father, and then realized I wanted to tell everyone who had nice things to say to me to go fuck themselves, because I didn't give a fuck. Like, yeah, take these middle fingers, shove them up your ass, and get the fuck out of my face with all your I'm sorry for your losses and all that great shit, right? So in that moment, it was a path of, like, what the fuck can I do, right? And most of the time, I much rather would be in person with the person, because I don't have any fucking words. I will sit here with you and hold space with you. I'll hug you. I ain't got a fucking thing to say. But I have learned at least one that's, like, kind of not awful, and that's, I wish I had the right words. I'm so sorry for your loss. And that's basically exactly how I feel. I don't fucking have the right words. There are none.
Right.
Yeah, and people are different. Like, when I am in, like, grief, like, I don't want to be around people. I don't want to be around anybody. And I really don't care what you have to say. I mean, not that I won't be rude or I won't, but I mean, whatever. Like, I remember going through my mom's funeral, and I don't know what anyone said, and whatever they said didn't make it any better or worse either way. Whatever the words they said were, not one of them stood out to me. There was nothing that they were going to say that could make me feel any different either way. You know, it's the way I looked at it. And
But
it was nice, though, that people showed up.
Exactly. Right. So I feel the same way. Like, I don't care what people said in those early days, as long as they didn't say something judgy, which no one did in those early days, luckily. But yeah, all of the, like, platitudes, none of that was bothersome to me. Yeah, because I
So
knew
angry and bitter.
I knew where people were coming from, and the fact that they were saying something is what mattered to me, not that, like, it was something dumb.
Jesus Christ, and don't tell me about your father's death at my father's fucking viewing. Please. Shut the fuck up.
That
stuff.
is,
I was
yeah.
so angry.
None of that
I was
stuff
hurt,
bothered
man.
Yeah,
I
I
was
got
hurt.
some of that. That was a little. I remember talking to someone who we all know. I'm not going to say their name. They had reached out to me right after Matt died, and then started telling me about like some estranged like family member that had also like, you know, that like kind of like, now I'm going to take the conversation over and make it about me.
Well, they teach us that in 12-step.
Yeah.
We got to relate in. We got to compare in by telling you about our story that's
How we're
similar to yours.
Yeah.
I hate that
It's
shit.
self-centered, I think.
I don't like it.
Well, it's a bad practice for self-centered people. The
Well,
sentiment
yeah,
is
yeah.
right. The sentiment is to be like, hey, I've experienced a similar loss. I'm here for you. I understand.
That doesn't help.
No.
Well,
No.
I think the idea of moving towards connection is the purpose of it. Like,
Yeah.
that's the good goal of it. But
Empathy
yeah,
or-
we fuck it all up.
You're right.
Massively. And I want to be clear, I'm not judging any of the people that said any of the shit to me, because that's the exact same shit I would have said to people
Right before that
before I knew
experience.
about it. Right? Like, so I'm not judging them. It's just we don't know, right?
Right.
And yeah, don't do those fucking things.
Yeah.
People are hurt, man. They don't want to hear none of your shit. Just go
See,
and
but
stare
I
at 'em.
feel different. I feel like as long as you're coming from a place of caring and
that
you're
means more.
trying, that's what matters to me. As long as it's
Right.
not judgy.
Now, as a person, I try not to say that kind of stuff anymore, but I don't care if other people say it.
I say I'm so sorry for your loss,
Yeah.
and that's a pretty generic platitude too. But
At this point in my life, I can completely respect that they were all trying to do the right thing in that moment. At that moment in time, with the amount of hurt I was going through,
and how old were you?
So if it's the loss
25.
Okay, but not in recovery yet, or in recovery,
2
right?
years in, yeah.
Okay.
So at this point, like, I try to either say something nice specifically about the person that passed, or share a story, or say something
That is
kind.
actually well recommended.
That's what and
Billy.
only, like, say, from talking to my sister about her experience, I try to do that if I know the person or knew the person that passed.
Yes, if you know
So-
a nice story about the person or a memory, perfect. Share
Yeah.
that, because that's fucking useful.
That's one of the other struggles that I've had, is that, you know, when Matt passed, he had, for all intents and purposes, been out of the program for about 2 years. He had dibbled and dabbled a little bit, probably 2 years prior. Right before he passed, he had kind of switched over to AA. But so, like, the people that I was closest to at that point didn't really know him well. The people who really loved him were not people in my inner circle. So, like, his immediate family and a couple of his good friends are friends of mine, certainly, but they're not my girlfriends. Like, my girlfriends didn't really know him
Right.
at the time that he passed. It is still very difficult, and something that I love when I have the opportunity is to connect with other people that loved him. His family doesn't really seem to want to talk about it, so they haven't been a resource. They seem to kind of want to just move on with their lives. Two of his best friends are two guys in recovery, and I have had limited opportunities to kind of, spend some time with them and talk about Matt. And it's amazing when it happens, but they're men. And I don't know that they think it's amazing when it happens.
No, they're probably angry about it.
Yeah.
It's all men feel.
Right. Just anger.
Are you planning on seeking, and I guess I would have to imagine not if you haven't yet, but are you thinking about seeking professional counseling in any way to process more of this?
I don't know why you assume I haven't.
That's a good fucking point. I don't know. I just assumed you had it.
Yeah, that's a wrong assumption. So,
Oh, good.
I would say, one of the things that NA taught me is that we have a number of resources at our disposal for anything that we're struggling with. Or so if we think about truly like just straight recovery, we have our network, we have our sponsors. So we could almost view them as kind of like, I don't know, more, I don't know how to say it, but you could almost kind of view them as like a therapist in a normal world situation.
sponsor?
Kind of.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that
No, I get what
the
you're saying.
relationship dynamic is a little different than it would be with your network. So I guess that kind of would be
They're like a more experienced
mentor.
person, right? That can
Mentor.
kind of sit there and
Yeah.
help you process things. Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree to that.
We have our literature. We have listening to other people's experiences kind of outside of our network, right? So if we think about a speaker meeting, just kind of you might not know that person at all, but you get to kind of sit and hear what they. So I feel like I was pretty well set up to dive into anything I felt like it was going to help me in the grief process. So I think I had actually recently ended therapy probably 2 months before Matt passed. So within 3 weeks of him passing, I called my counselor back up, started seeing her again. Obviously was, to some extent, to varying degrees, reaching out to my network, sought out books on grief and the grief experience, attended some different groups. So tried some different, like grief type groups, through some different venues. So yeah, I would say that, very, very quickly, I started looking for healthy ways. The one thing I was really conscious of in this process was I didn't want to act out or try to solve my feelings in unhealthy ways. I didn't do that completely successfully because I'm probably about 30 pounds heavier than I was when Matt died. But in terms of like shopping sprees, running out, finding another relation, a lot of those things that we can use to, again, with the exclusion of food, try to create a high for ourselves, right? Or a distraction.
Comfort.
Yeah, I
Ease.
really,
Yeah.
yeah. Food has been a problem. Food has been a problem for, probably food started being a little bit of an issue for me probably around his relapse. So.
Well, that's awesome. I think counseling, I think highly of it, right? I think it's fucking useful, and I think there's a reason that the people who can't show up for us and hold space for us in regular day-to-day interactions, like, yeah, we say we're paying for it, but that's like what a professional can do if they know what they're doing is to create that environment where we can have that healing process happen. Any final thoughts on grief? Thoughts of like what the person grieving could necessarily do that could help, or what people around the grieving person could not do or do? Like, any final thoughts from anybody?
Yeah, I think my experience has been there's nothing that can be done in those first days or weeks that's going to make it better. Like, there is no making it better. And stuffing it down, I don't believe is effective long term. I think that's really unhealthy. So I think, when you get to a point where you're ready, which some people aren't there for, for me, like, I wasn't even really functional for the first month. But when you get to a point where you're ready, seeking out resources, whether that's a therapist, whether that's a grief group, having something like that to lean on is good. And then for the people who, are around someone who's grieving, remember that they're grieving. Don't think, okay, a month's passed, they must be fine now. Like, keep checking in, keep asking how they're doing.
And for both of those parties, the person in grief and the people around the griever, I really would remind you, the goal is not to make it better, right? Pain is the struggle we're going through that is inevitable. Grief is the process that makes it better over time. We don't want to take away the feelings, right? We're not trying to make anything better. We're trying to go through this and process it, not alleviate it in any way.
Yeah, and I was thinking that for the individual, like for myself, I have to tell myself, like, it's okay to be sad. Like, it's okay to just allow myself to be sad. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, as a man anyway, like, that's some sort of weakness shit.
Just be
you know
angry,
what I mean?
Billy.
Right. Like, I can't be sad. Like, but no, it's okay to be sad for as long as you feel sad, you know, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I think that's another good point too, is like cutting yourself some slack. You know, like I'm really big on self-care. I don't put expectations on myself. Like, I've basically been in a state of I've been in a state of trauma for years.
Yeah.
And a state of grief, one could argue maybe as long, right? Since I found out about my husband's relapse.
Yeah, there isn't a time, you know?
Right,
Like,
right. I can't handle it all. I can't keep the 5 acres cut and the house perfect and my full-time job satisfied and take care of the dogs and take care of the chickens. And I can't do it all when I'm not operating at full capacity, which for me, grief has done that. And I cut myself slack on that. Like, I know that I'm not my best, most productive self when I'm struggling with these big emotions, and that's okay.
Great suggestions. Any final word?
No, thank you for coming in and sharing your story
I really
and Matt's
appreciate
story
it.
with us. We
Yeah,
appreciate
I
it.
told Jason I want to be like the third co-host. So
Yeah.
maybe did I pass the test? I'm totally game. This went way too fast.
It
Then
was
we have to
good.
buy another microphone because if we have another guest, he'll have to get a whole new
Always more
computer. He brings
We
all
need a
this
new
stuff.
table. But yeah, I mean, no, I enjoyed it. I think it's gonna be interesting. I don't know. I feel like you two would gang up on me. I got to be really careful about having you on too often. I think you guys think different than I do.
I can sit out on the like God topic.
Are you a God
Yes.
person?
I'm not a God person.
So that's so baffling. Then how do you find a silver lining in shit?
I don't think the two are related at all.
Oh my God! All right, another
Yeah,
podcast. We'll have to do that one. All right. Yeah. So learn something about grieving, right? Learn something about grieving. Learn what it's like to be on the grieving side. Learn what's helpful as somebody supporting someone through grief. Learn about the wonderful process so we don't maybe make the mistakes of doing more harm or at least not doing good. Kessler is a good person to listen to if you want to learn more about grief. Even if you don't believe that grief is a real thing or the stages of grief are a real thing, he's pretty inspiring and helpful and compassionate. So,
David Kessler?
yes.
That's funny. I stumbled upon one of his support groups on Facebook,
Yeah, he's
like early days.
he's like Mr. Rogers, but cooler, I think.
He's
almost.
pretty well
yeah.
recognized and
Yeah.
okay,
He's
that's
one
interesting.
of one of the authorities on it. So, yeah, check that out. And
There is also a local support group through our
is there?
sponsor, Voices of Hope. They have Healing Hearts, which is an overdose
Oh, okay.
grief support group.
All right. We'll see you next week. Did you like this episode? Share it with people you think might get something out of it. Check out the rest of our episodes at recoverysortof.com. Also, while you're there, you can find ways to link up with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, YouTube, anything. We're always looking for new ideas. Got an idea you want us to look into? Reach out to us.